Now, when it comes to responding to atheism, and that was the title of this lecture, responding to the atheistic narration, or whether it be responding to atheists' arguments, beliefs, and so on and so forth. As I mentioned in the beginning, I felt that it is more important for us to address ways of warding off those thoughts in the first place. And so to counter the arguments of the atheists and to respond to their arguments, to analyze their arguments and their proofs and so on and so forth, this requires an entire series of lectures. This requires an entire series of lectures, and I'm not saying it's not important. It is very, very important, because many of us, we come across atheists in our day-to-day lives, and especially if we're students, university students, we come across, and even many Muslim students are being affected by this new wave of atheism. And so it's very, very important to, look at their arguments and counter their arguments and so on and so forth. But in this, 45-minute or 1 hour lecture, it's not possible. It requires an entire series of lectures, and inshallah ta'ala, perhaps in the future, we could do something like that, an entire course on that. But for now, I just wanted to leave you all with a number of ways that will help us to basically protect ourselves or ward off those beliefs in the first place. And so it's more important to prevent the disease from being inflicted than it is for the disease to be inflicted, and then we go about looking for the cure. And these are only a few of the ways that I want to share, and inshallah ta'ala the Shaykh can add and put his input into more ways that we could help to ward off atheistic ideas and beliefs in the first place. But before we mention these, I just wanted to mention that there's a difference between a doubt that arises in our minds and a belief that we become convicted in. And so many of our youth, they may hear atheists and their arguments, and they may be affected by it, but it remains at the level of being a doubt. And so this is not kufr. It becomes kufr when a person persists in it, and he allows that doubt to overtake him until it becomes a belief. And so what we're talking about here are those beliefs. We need to ward off those beliefs, and these are some of the ways that inshaAllah ta'ala we could help ourselves to ward away those beliefs. First of all, we have to make sure that what we believe in is based on conviction, that it is based on yaqeen and not an assumption. This is point number one. We have to make sure, every single Muslim has to make sure that what he believes in, whether it be the existence of Allah, whether it be belief in the angels, belief in the akhirah, whatever it be about, we have to make sure that we believe in it with yaqeen, with certainty, and not an assumption. And so there are many Muslims out there who don't understand this. And this is what causes them to become strangled by atheists and their arguments and their doubts that they shove at them. Because their foundation is weak. What they believe in about Allah, about Allah's existence, is based on assumption and not a firm conviction. And that's why many ideologies and beliefs out there are actually based on assumption. I'm not talking about what we Muslims believe in, but I'm talking about the various ideologies that are out there, including atheism. It's based on assumption that comes to you in the form of certainty. In reality, it's an assumption, but it comes to us in the form of conviction. That these people, they are convicted and they are certain about this. And as I mentioned, the majority of atheists out there, they don't believe in it with firm conviction and certainty. And so the nafs, basically, it desires this assumption to become the truth, and so it turns it into certainty. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains this to us when He said, وَمَا يَتَّبِعُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ إِلَّا ظَنَّا, that most of them don't follow anything but assumption. The majority of people, they don't follow anything but assumption. إِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا. However, assumption cannot avail, cannot face off against the truth. Assumption is nothing in the face of the truth. And what is the truth? The truth is based on conviction. And so this is the first point that we have to realize, that if we want to protect ourselves from those atheistic beliefs and arguments that are out there, we need to base our belief and what we believe in based on certainty, based on, al-yaqeen and conviction. And the very difference between the truth and false myths is what? What is the difference between truth and false myths? That truth is based on proof and sound argument. And false myths, what are they based on? Assumption. And so this is the difference between the two. Moving on to the second point. To equip yourself with knowledge, firm and sound knowledge of the deen, before venturing out there into the world of man-made ideologies and trying to take them on. And so false ideologies and beliefs, in many cases, they originate from ignorance of the truth. From ignorance of the truth. And so how many do we know? I'm sure each and every single one of us knows of someone who may have deviated, whether it be to become an outright atheist or to end up having doubts in their mind about Islam. How many of us know of those who ended up in that state as a result of thinking that they had enough knowledge and they could now take on these atheists, debate them, try to delve into their arguments and see how I can respond and so on and so forth, but yet they were not firm in their knowledge of the deen to begin with. And so to equip ourselves with knowledge of the deen, and this is what each and every single one of us are trying to do, whether it be through this institute or other ways of equipping ourselves with firm knowledge of the deen. Moving on to the third point, and that is to free yourself from the whims, to free yourself from the slavery of your whims. To free yourself from the slavery of your hawa. And so our hawa is our desires and our whims that are always inclined towards evil. And so the most dangerous kind of slavery, as we mentioned earlier, is our slavery to our desires and the desires of our nafs and the whims and those desires that our nafs is inclined towards. And so most of mankind are like this. They say they're free, but in reality, they are enslaved by their desires. And so, although the person is liberated and free from worshipping rocks and stones, he may not be worshipping an idol in front of him, but he is worshipping something that is even more dangerous than that, and that is the very essence of what causes people to worship those idols, and that is the hawa. the whims and desires of the soul. And so he thinks he's not making tawaf around an idol, but the reality is he's making tawaf around his hawa without even noticing. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the hawa as a deity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referred to the hawa as a god that the people worship. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Do you not see the one who takes his deity, his god, his hawa? And so the atheists say that they don't worship any god, they don't believe in any god, but yet they have taken gods, and those gods are their own desires, their hawa. And so there are some, whether it be Muslims or non-Muslims, who may be indulging in sin. And they embrace ideologies, they embrace and take on ideologies with their whims. Their backing is their whims. That is the root cause of why they take on certain ideologies, whether it be atheism, secularism, liberalism, whatever it be. And so they're indulging in a certain sin, for example, and then that leads them to embrace certain ideologies. Why? Because this gives them grounding and justification for continuing in those sins. So they want to escape from being labeled as evildoers, as sinners, and they want to instead be labeled as intellectuals, free thinkers. And this is exactly, coming back to the same point that we mentioned of the root cause for the Europeans to rebel against the church and wanting to free themselves from the church, because they were considered sinners and so on and so forth, because they indulged in certain sins. And so now they want to remove that label from themselves. And we find many Muslims falling into this same trap. We find many Muslims falling into this same trap. And that brings us to the next point. That brings us to the next point. And so this is point number 4. And point number 4 is basically to control your shahawat. To control your shahawat. Shahawat are basically the lustful desires that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created in each one of us, that we're supposed to basically go against. And so our nafs desires those evil shahawat, and so we're supposed to stop our desires from chasing after those shahawat. Now, we find that two fitnas, the fitna of shahawat and the fitna of shubuhat, are interlocked. They always come hand in hand. And so, resisting our shahawat is a must in order to prevent ourselves from falling into shubuhat. Shubuhat are basically the doubts about our deen that shaitan comes and whispers into our minds. So we have shahawat on the one hand, and then we have shubuhat on the other. And so these two fitnas, shaitan comes and attacks us with these two fitnas. And no fitna exists on the face of the earth except that they come in through these two doors. And as I said, they come hand in hand. And so, if you want to resist the shubuhat from attacking you, the doubts that shaitan comes and attacks you with about your deen, and what is included in that is atheism and the essence of Allah's existence. If you want to ward yourself away from that, then you have to control your shahawat. And that is because shahawat always lead to shubuhat. And that is as I mentioned. That is as I mentioned in the previous point, that people want to free themselves. They want to free themselves, or rather, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to free ourselves from the slavery of our whims, right? This is what we mentioned, the previous point. And so those who do not free themselves from being enslaved to their whims, they are those who open themselves to shahawat and indulge in them. What this leads to is shubuhat. The evidence for this is that shaitan drags people into the muharramat, into the prohibitions of Allah through shahawat. And so once they control the person, once those shahawat control the person, he entices the person to now legalize those shahawat. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا يَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالسُّوءِ وَالْفَحْشَاءِ. That shaitan, he entices you, or rather he commands you to do evil and indulge in indecency, in fahsha. And then what does Allah say right after that? What does Allah say right after that? وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And that you say about Allah that which you have no knowledge. What is this? This is shubuhat. That you say about Allah what you have no knowledge of. And so those who legalize what Allah has made prohibited, what leads them to that? It is their shahawat. And so a fornicator, he indulges so much in fornication, or someone who drinks alcohol, he indulges so much into it, and shaitan takes control of him with regards to that particular sin and with regards to that particular shahwa, to the point where this person is drowning in it, and now he wants to legalize it for himself. He wants to say that this is halal. And so now he says that this is halal, and this leads him out of the fold of Islam. Moving on to the next point, and that is point number 5. And that is that with regards to any evil, with regards to any fitna, whether it be the fitna of shahawat or the fitna of shubuhat, we need to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from shaitan. Because reality is that whatever shahwa or shubha that we are attacked with, it is from the whisperings of shaitan. And so there are many ideologies, man-made ideologies out there that require al-isti'adah, seeking refuge in Allah from shaitan, and not intellectual arguments. And not intellectual arguments, nor even textual evidences from the Quran or from the Sunnah. Rather, all they require is al-isti'adah, seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from shaitan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often mentions that remembering Him, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeking refuge in Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, when shaitan attacks us with those whisperings, it purifies the heart from such ideologies. It purifies the heart from such ideologies. Moving on to the next point, and that is the 6th point, and that is that we need to attach our hearts to what is real. We need to attach our hearts to the real life that comes after death, and not the materialism of this life. Not the materialism of this life. And so materialistic deception is the very nucleus of atheism. Materialistic deception is the very nucleus of atheism. And so people, they want to free themselves from the bonds and the restrictions of religion and enjoy their lives, and that is only because they are attached to the material world. That is only because they're attached to the material world. We find this in Surah Al-Kahf, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us of the story of the companions of the garden. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said of the one who was arrogant and he had two gardens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said of him, وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتَهُ وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ, that he entered his garden while he was unjust, arrogant. قَالَ مَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا, he said, I don't believe that this garden will ever perish. It will remain forever. وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمَةً وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمَةً. And what did he say? He said that I don't think that the hour, the day of judgment, will ever come. Why? Because he's attached to the material world. He's attached to his garden and the dunya. And so this is what caused him to announce his disbelief and to claim that there is no akhirah. And so we find that many people who end up being entrapped in the doubts of the atheists, it is because there came a time when their hearts became heedless of the akhirah and what's going to happen to them after death. They became heedless and negligent of that, and so it was easy for those doubts to take control of them. Finally, the last point I wanted to mention is that in the end, at the end of the day, what we're talking about when we talk about atheism is about the world of the unseen, the ghaib, the world of the unseen. And so neither me nor you nor any other human being knows of that world, the world of the unseen. And when we talk about the world of the unseen, we're talking about what they refer to as metaphysics. And we're talking about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the existence of the angels, what happens to a person after he dies, the akhirah, Jannah, the hellfire, and so on and so forth. This is all part of the world of the unseen. And so neither me nor you nor any other human being who is living today can tell us anything, not even the smallest thing, about that world, about what happens in that world. And so if you ever happen to be at a crossroads where these atheistic ideas come to you, and now you're unsure, does Allah exist, does He not exist? Is there life after death, is there not life after death, and so on and so forth. Remember that you're at a crossroads. Either you can choose to believe or you could choose to disbelieve. But remember that if you choose to disbelieve, then basically what you're saying is nothing happens to me after I die. I'll just perish, nothing will happen, I'll die, and that's the end of the story. However, the negative consequences behind choosing that path are severe, as opposed to if you choose to believe and you submit to the fact that Allah has told us of His existence and He has revealed the Quran and He wants us to follow it. And so to choose that first path, to choose the path of submission, it doesn't carry those negative consequences of what will happen to you after you die. Whereas if you choose the second path, it comes with those negative consequences. And so you're at a crossroads, and according to you, both are possibilities. Both are possibilities. And this is what they refer to as being agnostic. An agnostic is basically one who believes that anything is possible. God may exist or He may not exist. For me, I don't have any evidence to prove either. Whereas an atheist, he's one who believes full on that there is no God to begin with. Or at least he claims to. believe in that. And so remember that if you ever happen to come at a crossroads, remember this, that it is a crossroads for you. You can choose either to believe or to disbelieve, but if you choose to disbelieve, it comes with those negative consequences, meaning that for you it is a possibility. But if it happens to become a reality, then you suffer. Whereas if you choose to believe, what are you missing out on? You're not missing out on anything. And that's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that those who believe and do righteous actions, He will give them a good life in this dunya and also a good life in the akhirah. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, commanding His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, and worship your Lord until al-yaqeen. What is al-yaqeen in this context? It is death. Why? Why has death been referred to as al-yaqeen here? It is for sure, but why?
After death, if you chose to believe.
What did the brother mention?
Because it's ilm al-ghayb after that.
Because it's ilm al-ghayb. Because when a person dies, now he sees the reality of the ghayb that he was asked to believe in this dunya. And so that's why Allah here refers to it as yaqeen. Worship your Lord until you see with certainty what happens in the akhirah. Until you see the angel of death with your eyes. And that's why every single human being, at that particular point in time, the moments before death, they submit. They believe. Even the most arrogant of disbelievers, Fir'aun, at that particular point, what did he say? قَالَ آمَنْتُ. He said at that particular point when the waves came crashing down on him and he saw death before his eyes, he declared, now I believe in the Lord of Banu Israel. Why? Because now he sees with certainty what comes after death. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us to have all benefited from these few words. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect each and every single one of us from each and every single doubt that shaitan whispers to us. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our Muslim youth from the same. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.